Today I want to talk about 5 horrible things that are going on in the world, but then I want to talk about how these 5 horrible things are trending to become less horrible. So the 5 trends that I'll be talking about today are cancer, extreme poverty, global warming, overpopulation, and unjustified hatred. Number 1. Cancer. Yes, more people are getting cancer today than ever before, and globally, 1 in 6 deaths are due to some form of cancer, and this makes it the second leading cause of fatalities. But as the title of this video suggests, I have to be talking about positive trends on negative things. So what is the good news about this? Well, on a per capita basis, we are 17% more likely to survive a cancer diagnosis than what we were in 1990. And this is because the cancer treatments are rapidly improving. So in 1990, if you were diagnosed with cancer, you had 50% odds of making it to the next 5 years. However, if you've been diagnosed with cancer recently, you have a 67% average survival odds. And also, I should point out that this is an average across all forms of cancer, and depending on the individual type of cancer has a very different result. Some of the biggest improvements for increasing the odds for surviving cancer since 1990 is prostate cancer, which went from only 67.8% of cancer patients surviving to today now being 98.6%. But on the lower end of the improvement slide, we had pancreas, which went from a 2.5% survival rate to an 8.2%. And so although we are improving and we are making progress, we still have a very long way to go. And another thing I should mention as well is that with this 67% odds of surviving a cancer diagnosis, this is very unlikely to plateau. And that's not only it, the odds of getting cancer will actually be declining in the coming years as well. And so there's a research project going on in Australia, and they're making a vaccine that if everything is as good in the real world as it is on paper, it'll be able to protect against many forms of cancer, including blood, breast, lung, renal, ovarian, pancreatic, and glioblastoma cancers. So if little things like this have been done all around the world, not only will we see an increasing rate of survival of a cancer diagnosis, but we'll probably see a per capita decrease in the amount of people getting cancer as well. Now, moving on to the second horrible thing that's going on in the world that's becoming slightly less horrible every year. Global warming. And so it seems like it's getting worse and worse every year, and it's a dying cause, and depending on what social circle that you hang out with, you might find that a large portion of the population would believe the word of an angry cable news TV talking host as opposed to literally every scientist on the planet. Almost. But anyway, despite the fact that public opinion is moving a little bit too slowly on this issue, we are actually making a little bit of headway as far as reducing CO2 and CO2 equivalents in the atmosphere. So check out these recent figures for CO2 emissions. So in 2018 and 2019, we hit 36.7. And then with COVID, we fell down to 34.81. Meanwhile, in 2021, we're back to 36.4. And so yes, a lot of us slowing down or leveling out of the CO2 levels is because of the lockdowns and is because of the flight cancellations. And so this may be temporary. And also for 2022, we're probably not going to do too well due to the war in Ukraine because generally speaking, wars are horrible for CO2 emissions. But at least for a bigger picture, if we were to zoom out a bit more, we may finally be starting to see a bit of a plateau for the increasing CO2 emission rising levels. So in the UK, carbon emissions have been falling since 2008, and check this out from the United States. So this graph here shows the cost to generate a megawatt per hour. So these two on the bottom here are solar and wind. So they have been the cheapest way to make energy since 2015. So if you look at a pure business case here, where you're only looking at the costings and you don't have a care at all about CO2 emissions, at least wind and solar now are actually better for the business case. And yes, this does not factor in storage, but battery costs are also falling. And this is for a combination of reasons, including that there is less rare ingredients needed and better mining practices to get them to the surface. And the cost of a lithium-ion battery has decreased in cost by 97% since 1991. 97%. And if you don't believe that, well, this is according to MIT. And okay, that's the UK, that's the United States, so they're both Western countries, but what about some of the non-Western countries that are big emitters, say like China for example? Well, we're actually seeing progress here as well. So out of all the electricity that China generates right now, 65% of it is from dirty sources, and at a whopping 35% is actually from clean sources already, as in right now. And they are following a trajectory that will see 57% clean energy and 43% dirty by the year 2040. And this is according to the International Energy Agency. Alright, so time for the third horrible trend that is now trending to become slightly less horrible, and that is extreme poverty. So between 1990 to 2015, the amount of people living in extreme poverty has fallen from 1.9 billion down to 0.74 billion, and so that is roughly a trend of about 47 million people per year who are escaping poverty since 1990. And unfortunately, a little bit of a depressing fact about these statistics though is that extreme poverty is actually increasing in sub-Saharan Africa, but it has massively decreased in basically every other part of the world. And so, as poverty is completely eradicated from these other parts of the world, we'll be able to apply more focus and attention to these parts of sub-Saharan Africa. And here's another really good fact about extreme poverty. In 1981, 42% of the entire world's population was living in extreme poverty. Think about that for a second. That's almost half the people living on Earth in 1981 were living in extreme poverty, just not knowing where their next meal is going to come from. But today, that figure is 9.27%. So we still have a long way to go, but the amount of strides, the amount of improvement that we've made since 1981, that is incredible, isn't it? And let's just hope that this work continues and we can completely eradicate extreme poverty in the coming years. So, number 4. Now this one isn't so much of a horrible trend, it's more of a how many people can actually fit in this planet and are we going to reach our breaking point? And so, overpopulation. It took us up to the year 1800 to reach a population of 1 billion. And then, to make it to our second billion, so adding on our next billion from that, it took only 128 years. And then to add on another billion to that, making it 3 billion, it took 42 years. Then, for our fourth billion, it took 14 years. For our fifth billion, it took 13 years. For our sixth billion, it took 12 years. And for our 7th billion, it took 11 years. And now we're on the point of cracking 8 billion in just under 10 years. And so it seems scary, and we may even be at 100 billion before we know it. So do we need to freak out about this? Well, no, according to the research from Hans Rosling, and that is because the rate at which our population has been growing has actually been decreasing since 1968. So the deceleration of our population growth is actually already started, or the derivative of our growth, if that kind of makes sense. Or to put that into non-mathematical language, our growth is slowing down. And so much so, in fact, that we can project that the world population will be peaking at 10.9 billion people, and this will be in the year 2100. And then from there, we'll be in decline, and that may cause other issues, but we'll deal with that when we get to it. And a big reason for this population decline is actually for the development of the world. And just to give you an example that you may have noticed in your own life, if you're in the baby boomer generation, I bet that you have between, on average, 3 to 6 siblings. However, if you're a millennial or younger, I bet that you probably only have 1 sibling, or maybe even 2. And to really just overly simplify why this is the case of why people have less children when they're living in a developed country, is because in a developed country, the parents can be reasonably confident that all of their children will survive to make it to adulthood. So now that brings us to our last horrible trend that is actually trending to become slightly less horrible, and that is we will be able to elect better leaders in the future, and that is because we are becoming less hateful. Actually, that's not really true. We're becoming less hateful at people for no good reason. So to prove my point here, I'll show you the study from Pew Data and then basically explain these results. They went up to all the people in the study and asked, is racial diversity good for society? And so 42% of boomers said yes, and then for every generation after that, it's slightly less racist, down to the point where it's at Generation Zers, or Zers, if you're watching this from America, where it's at 62%. And so that's 62%, that's still way too low. I mean, it should be at 100, But just like all of the trends that I've been talking about in this video, it still is moving in the right direction. And here's another issue that shows that we may be able to elect better leaders in the future. 54% of Generation Zers see climate change as a real threat, compared to 38% of a silent generation. That's the generation before the baby boomers. And now let's get on to the subject of gay marriage. So in this topic, a massive portion of the population from every generation just seem to be neutral on it. So bearing in mind that a lot of the population are just totally neutral on it one way or the other, only 48% of people are for it, which is way too low. But the positive key takeaway here is that only 15% are actively against it for the current younger generations. And when you go back in time and you look at the silent generation, again the oldest generation, only 18% were okay with it or for it, as opposed to 48%. And so that is a massive improvement, and there's almost a majority. And so in regards to a lot of these issues of blind hatred, I mean, for us Zoomers, for our millennials, we're not perfect. But at least the right views have the majority numbers, which means that we'll have the voters to be able to elect better leaders that represent the proper views as the years roll by. So anyway, just with the news headlines just bombarding us with negative news on a daily basis, I just thought it's important to point out every now and then how there are positive things that are going on in the world, and they're making these horrible things a little bit less horrible. And over time, we will be able to solve the majority of these problems, along with many other problems that I've not listed on this video. So as per usual, thanks for watching.